provides Southwestern with the opportunity to engage in thought-provoking conversations, bringing to campus persons of international recognition to speak on issues of ethics, public service, and public policy. The Shilling Lecture is made possible by the generous support of the Brown Foundation of Houston. In 1999, the Brown Foundation endowed this lecture series and appropriately suggested that it be named in honor of Southwestern's 13th president, Roy Shilling, and his wife, Margaret. We continue to be profoundly grateful for our relationship with the Brown Foundation, and they support many of Southwestern's signature programs, such as our Brown Symposium, which will celebrate its 40th year this spring. And tonight, the Brown Foundation's generosity enables us to gather for this acclaimed lecture series. After Dr. Simmons speaks, we will invite two Southwestern students to the stage who will engage in a conversation with her, and we look forward to their questions. And so it is my pleasure to introduce our guest tonight, Dr. Ruth J. Simmons. After completing her PhD in Romance Languages and Literatures at Harvard University, Simmons served in various faculty and administrative roles at the University of Southern California, Princeton University, and Spelman College before becoming president of Smith College, the largest women's college in the United States. At Smith, she launched a number of important academic initiatives which really, truly changed the liberal arts environment for women. I remember it well, including an engineering program, the first at an American women's college. In 2001, she became the president of Brown University, making her the first African-American president of an Ivy League institution. Dr. Simmons is the recipient of many honors, including the 2001 President's Award from the United Negro College Fund, the 2002 Fulbright Lifetime Achievement Medal, the 2004 Eleanor Roosevelt Valkill Medal, the Centennial Medal from Harvard University, the Theodore Hesburgh Award for Excellence in Leadership, and many, many more. She's also a member of the National Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, and the Council on Foreign Relations. She serves on multiple boards, including the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Awarded numerous honorary degrees, she received the Brown faculty's highest honor, the Susan Clover Rosenberger Medal, in 2011, and in 2012, she was named to the French Legion of Honor. Currently, she is serving as the first female president of Prairie View A&M University, making this a theme for the day. Women leaders. Tonight, she will give a presentation titled Diversity in Higher Education, How Far Have We Come? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ruth J. Simmons.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. I must say, I could sit here all day and look out over this beautiful campus. This is my first visit, and I'm quite astounded at how really peaceful and inspiring it is. I had asked one of the students who the landscape architect was who designed this. And they didn't know, but I thought maybe it was Olmsted or somebody like that. So, but not at that time. So again, good afternoon, and thank you for welcoming me to this historic campus in this historic region. As a native Texan, I'm embarrassed to say that this is my first visit to Georgetown and my first visit to this university campus. I want to extend a very special greeting to President Laura Scandera Trombley on this important occasion. The lineage of this institution is well known. It is among a small number of institutions that have achieved renown following the amalgamation of several institutions. And frankly, I rather like the symbolism of such an amalgamation. It speaks to the ways in which educational institutions beneficially mutate, adding richly to the legacies of their predecessor entities. But leadership lineage is also important and critical to the process and the progress of most universities. Leadership eras that build decisively upon previous ones invariably advance the institutions they serve to excellent advantage. And I'm certain that the Trombley era will accomplish just that. Again, what a remarkable setting for an historic institution. I'm particularly sorry that I have not ever been able to see the red poppy display for which this area is known. I confess that the poppy fields in Les Coquelicots painting by Claude Monet is a treasured memory of the year I spent studying in France. I also think this vivid color is a fitting image for an occasion such as this, when one celebrates a bright new beginning, along with a richly vaunted past. Now, I have personally had 3 such beginnings, as I think you have too. The first at a women's college, the second at an Ivy League university, and most recently at what some call an historically Black university. Now, some are fond of asking me what differences distinguish my experience at these 3 institutions, particularly an HBCU and an Ivy League university. Now, I admit that maybe I'm wrong to see it this way, but I regard such inquiries as spurious. I do not appreciate the comparison of institutions as an opportunity to judge the superiority of one over another. As a child of the pre-civil rights era in the segregated South, where access to education, any education, was prized, I'm grateful to be a part of a profession where people can so routinely be awakened to the importance of learning in a way that often changes the very focus and meaning of their lives. I appreciate that such enlightenment and transformation can take place in many different types of educational environments. I was educated in inner city schools, should say segregated in inner city schools. I attended an HBCU. I completed my doctorate, as you heard, at Harvard. So I can relate the powerful intellectual growth I experienced in each of those environments. Those experiences in toto have made me the leader I am today, and I treasure all the advantages that each of them gave me. A lot of young people aspiring to leadership in higher education come to me and say, well, what's the secret? What should I do to become a university leader? What I'm given to say to them is something that often they've never heard before. And I say the most important thing to remember is not to change yourself to become a leader. And I advocate that people take all of their experiences, all of their knowledge from what they have been through to shape their leadership. So again, I treasure all the advantages that each of these institutions gave me. Higher education was an important lifeline for me, showing me that the world would not always be the environment that I grew up in, and that held my parents to a hardscrabble existence for virtually all of their lives. Kept from education and opportunity, they nevertheless led productive and honorable lives, giving their children, all 12 of us, the benefit of their teachings and their protection. And people love to hear, if you've been celebrated or if you've been deemed important, they love to hear that something grand perhaps made you that way. And this is why to my cousin who's in the audience, I always point to my mother, who is mostly responsible for the person that I am today and for the things that I can actually do. Because she was not well educated. She finished eighth grade, or at least went to the eighth grade. She worked as a maid for most of her time in Houston. But she was the wisest person that I've known, and the person who taught me most about how to be a person, what to care about, how to treasure the opportunities that I have, and how to consider my work. Because I saw her spend hours in thankless jobs, ironing, for example, with the greatest care and attention. And as a child, I just marveled that she would not resent that work, and that instead she wanted to perfect her ability to iron. And that's why I became a person who cared about my work, whatever the work that I was doing. And so the elitism of higher education, we all know about that. But I tell my students every day, be careful, because you do not know who will influence your life in an extraordinary way. So respect the possibility in everybody that you meet that you could have an extraordinary experience that points you in the right direction. I chose a career in education because I frankly see nothing comparable to its ability to elevate the life chances of human beings to their fullest potential. And that's why I believe that it is important to focus on access to education in its full array of possibilities, including access to all pursuits and professions, the widest variety of enriching activities, and especially learning from the encounter with difference. But of course, little of that can meaningfully occur unless we work hard to alleviate the legacy of bias and discrimination that crept into the policies and practices of universities in previous eras. Practices that once banned certain individuals from admission, policies that imposed judgments about human worth based on narrow or biased perspectives, practices that judged everyone on how close they came to a deliberately non-inclusive and purposefully elitist ideal. I remember, I don't know why this came to my mind, but I had a colleague at Princeton who had worked his way up. He was a philosopher, actually, and became the provost of the university. And he used to tell me stories about growing up in that area and recognizing that because he was Jewish, he had very little chance of getting into Princeton because Princeton had an avowed Jewish quota when he was a child. Higher education in this country has been through so many different eras of discrimination against different groups. It's extraordinary where we are today, considering where we have come from. Given my age, you can well imagine that I've been an eyewitness to many phases of segregation and diversity in higher education. Now, I'm not a social scientist. I'm like you, a humanist. But I have observed each stage with a keenness of interest and a desire to see our sector make substantial progress toward fairness and true inclusion and respect. Today, I find myself looking back and asking how much progress we have made since the days when segregation was stated policy and systematic exclusion a goal. How much progress have we made? Well, today, if you look at data, you'll read that the student population in U.S. higher education is more diverse than ever. In a recent survey by the American Council on Education, the authors report that students of color made up 29.6% of the undergraduate population in 1996 and a whopping 45.2% in 2016. In the same time frame, graduate students of color increased from 20.8% to 32%. Now that sounds encouraging, until that is, we look at the variety of factors influencing that growth. Importantly, the US population itself grew more diverse in this period, with the white population dropping to 61%. The Hispanic population grew to almost 20% and significantly sought higher education to a much higher degree than, for example, African Americans. Over a 20-year period, Hispanic high school graduates attending college increased by 13%, while Black high school graduates increased only 1% during the same period. Asians were the most likely group to enroll in college, and Native Americans and Pacific Islanders were the least likely to enroll. More recently, a good deal of work has gone into understanding achievement gaps. And thankfully, a good deal of study and intervention has taken up the challenge of low persistence rates, high school dropout rates, and the impact of high debt on persistence. Now, I'm sure you all know that debt has become a major factor in thwarted attainment. 67% of Black students at the associate's level owed an average of $22,000. It should be noted that while universities are more diverse in terms of student demographics, faculties remain overwhelmingly white. It perhaps goes without saying that the college presidency has an even longer way to go to be representative of the shift in enrollment in higher education. Yet a startling 42% of service and maintenance personnel are people of color. This has really struck me across the years when on college campuses, where in talking to minority students, they often cite service and maintenance workers as the people that they go to for advice, as the people who help them through difficult periods, and so on. Which only reaffirms my conviction that that kind of mentoring can take place with people of all walks of life, not just with a professor who is a member of a national academy. The unevenness of representation across groups, across areas of study, and across economic status naturally leads to the continuing disparities that we perceive and that we experience in higher education. So what's the nature of these perceived disparities and what actually contributes to them? And what you're going to hear is my non-social scientific observations about what I think is going on. First of all, and most importantly, what I've seen over the decades is our expectations have shifted dramatically. Today, many formerly disenfranchised groups dare to say how they think the world should operate. When I went off to college, no one expected much. You certainly didn't expect to offer an opinion about the way things should be at a university. You were just grateful to be admitted. With little true integration and virtually no meaningful inclusion, students and staff put their heads down, expecting to endure slights and hostile treatment, and watching those images during the civil rights struggle when people were howling at grade school children trying to go into school doors. I think people thought that was the image that carried forward. Put your head down, work hard, finish your education, and don't complain. But with student populations achieving critical mass, New and in some cases bolder expectations began to take hold. Students asked questions. They challenged the prevailing order and the biases they perceived that worked against their full participation in the educational enterprise. Now, this empowerment on the part of students and others has led to a large number of conversations in the academy about who is deserving, how students are treated, what constitutes valid areas of scholarship and research, and so on. I said that students didn't expect much in the early days, but now a student on a university campus expects everything and more. And so I remember when I was serving on the board of trustees at Princeton, there was a very intense discussion among the board members about what's going on. I mean, why are students unhappy? You know, we're giving them wonderful financial aid. They have the privilege of going to Princeton. They have access to so many things, and yet they still voice their unhappiness about being at Princeton. Why? The simplest way that I could say it to people who didn't understand was to say, because what they really want is an embrace. They want to be accepted fully. They want to be respected. They want to be included. And it's not enough to say, we've given you financial aid and we've done all of these other things for you, when they can see in your eyes that you still don't want them here. It's not enough for them. So young people today are expecting everything. They don't want half of the sandwich. They want the whole thing. Now, of course, in this environment, hypervigilance is very common because students are acutely aware that they may not be welcome, that they may not be included, and they are on the lookout for how they are being treated. So you can imagine the tensions that this continues to cause on many campuses, and it tends also to color, if I may say it that way, the character of relations on college campuses today. Another issue is that strategy and policy discussions have very helpfully shifted away from the minimalism of the 60s and 70s, that mere access, to the question of how to achieve full and equal participation. Now, this shift, so we're now talking not about, okay, you have access. We're talking about how do we manage to manifest full inclusion and parity. Well, this is obviously the morally correct position, but it has made for the playing out of a raft of political squabbles across campuses, including the examination of and call for accountability. Not just accountability for the way things are now, but accountability for past offenses. For example, demands for the elimination of hostile or offensive images and traditions that privilege one perspective of history. For example, a focus on hiring a more diverse faculty, administration, and staff. And a call for engagement with the communities from which the more diverse student groups come. Now, you don't have to go far in trying to find examples of this embattled climate on campuses, where students are asserting that they will not tolerate images that denigrate who they are. You've seen it at A&M, you've seen it at the University of Texas. It is everywhere, it's pervasive. Pervasive. Third, the diversification of campuses has often led to more successful pressure on boards and administrations due to the engagement of white allies and unified minority groups who have become ardent advocates of diversity. So it's no longer just a few students isolated in their opinion, but there have been movements that have where many others have joined in the view that change needs to occur. The result is that the overall climate for diversity is much more complex due to these factors. First, the intersection of challenges that impinge on the ability of institutions to concretize measures that produce expected or desired outcomes. If you are an administrator or a staff member or a faculty member and you are negotiating in the midst of this kind of these kinds of challenges, it's actually pretty hard to do. First of all, administrators and faculty have a good deal more experience. They tend to be more measured in their considerations. And they're dealing with often young people who want immediate change, and immediate change on their terms and only their terms. So I remember also when I was on the board of trustees at Princeton, I arrived on campus one day and there was an ongoing occupation of the president's office. And I was asked to go and to speak with the students occupying the president's office. I said, no, I don't think that would be proper, but Princeton actually wanted me to go in and talk to them, and so I went in. And what I saw in the president's office was a highly organized group of young people. Some were blogging, some were they had all kinds of assignments, and so forth. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know what I can do in this kind of situation, but I asked, well, I'm here. What do you want from me? And they wanted me to answer a question for them. They wanted to know if they could get kicked out of school because of this demonstration. So I tried to assuage their concern by giving them certain parameters. So I said, well, first of all, have you destroyed any property in this office? They said, no. Have you gone into the files? No. Do you have any intention to do damage here? No. Have you prevented anybody from doing their work? No. I said, well, that being the case, if you continue on that path, my guess is that the university will be inclined to be very lenient if you don't do any damage. The second thing they wanted to know is what I thought of their protest. Well, what they wanted was they wanted the name of Woodrow Wilson to be struck definitively from the Woodrow Wilson School, a very famous school of public administration, basically, at Princeton. And that was their demand. And they asked what I thought of that. I said, well, you know, I would be very surprised if Princeton moved in that direction, given the fact that there had been so many graduates who held a diploma from the Woodrow Wilson School. That might be pretty difficult for people to swallow. But I said, one thing on your list seems to me to occupy the high ground. And if I were you, I would reduce your demands to one thing and just stick with that one thing. And if you stick with that one thing, you'll win. And the one thing that they wanted was for Princeton to tell the truth about Woodrow Wilson. And so they did stick with that. And what Princeton did was to mount an exhibition and then to tell the real story of Woodrow Wilson and what he did in government that many people deem to have been racist. But these negotiations are very fraught often and sometimes cannot be concluded in that way. And that's one of the challenges that we face. So it's very hard to plan or predict what's going to happen in an environment in which empowered and impatient actors who lack the experience and understanding of how institutions are governed are calling for the elimination of modes of operating. And then the fact of the variety of media involved makes controlling information exceedingly important. Institutional statements have less sway in an environment of independent blogs, Twitter feeds, and Facebook posts, which easily ignite concern and opposition to what institutions may be saying or trying to do. Institutional governance and efforts to bring about helpful change can be flat-footed in such an environment, leading to unhelpful or divisive conflagrations that undermine a common purpose and a common sense of belonging. And those are the very things that most in a community seek. So what's the current state of diversity in higher education? I would say it's still evolving. In some cases, in helpful ways, in some cases, less helpful ways. There is no doubt that the numbers are trending overall toward greater diversity. If we look to the past in terms of where greater numbers lead us, it's safe to say that universities will be called on increasingly to change their ways. How? By doing more than paying lip service to inclusion. Meaningful participation in the way that the institution defines itself today and tomorrow will be the critical factor. One has only to look to our peers to see ways in which this redefinition is occurring. I believe, frankly, that we are at the dawn of this process, and I think one need not be fearful of it. In a sense, it is an entirely normal evolution reflecting the demographic changes in the country. With all that is occurring, I conclude that we are much more successfully diverse today, not simply in terms of the numbers, but especially in terms of addressing the deeper causes of exclusion and discrimination. To me, that signals the current strength of this endeavor across higher education. That higher education is capable of change is not debatable. That change is evident in many ways. But we have a ways to go to purge ourselves of the practices that prevented so many from feeling an equal partner in shaping our democracy. But that journey is well worth it, for the very idea that a child born in the poorest and most alienated and underserved community can find their way to education and thereby transform their future. My goodness, that is the most amazing and uplifting prospect that our way of life offers. When the least of us have access to a productive life, the vision of founders seeking life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness continues to thrive. If we abandon the role of education in realizing that vision, I think we'll be abandoning the best source of providing access and equity. I'll stop there, and I look forward to engaging with the students on their questions. Thank you very much.
We now welcome our student panelists. Southwestern University faculty recommended the two students who will join us on stage for this evening's question and answer session. Our first student panelist is Gracie Huber. Gracie is a senior at Southwestern from Midland, Texas. She will graduate in the spring with a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education with a specialization in special education. She's the president of Kappa Delta Pi, an international education honors society on campus, and she's dedicated to public education as she moves forward in the field of education. Welcome. Our second student panelist is Taylor Williams. Taylor is in her junior year at Southwestern. She is a political science major and a philosophy minor from Round Rock, Texas. She's president of the Southwestern University chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority and a former Mosaic ambassador. Welcome. And now, Dr. Simmons will have the opportunity to respond to the questions posed by our panelists.
Well, we just want to thank you so much for coming to our campus, and we're so honored to get to sit up here with both presidents, historical honorary presidents. It's exciting, and so we just want to thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we'd like to start off with our first question of the night, which is, Dr. Simmons, what do you feel is your main purpose as a leader of an academic institution?
Well, it's hard to say what is the main purpose without including a lot of things. But I'll begin by saying that for me, you all are the most important thing that we do. If we do that well, we succeed. If we do it poorly, we don't. Now, what does it mean when I say that you're at the center of what we do? That means that we want you to be challenged. We want you to be well educated. We want you to be familiar with the things that matter. We want you to care about your communities. We want you to have a total experience so that when you leave and go out into the world, you'll become the leaders who succeed us. And so when I'm really thinking about my responsibility at Prairie View, I'm thinking first about my students and what they're experiencing and whether or not they're being challenged. And, I have a wonderful relationship with my students because, they see me, some of them call me grandma. And yeah, I'm not happy about that. But anyway, but that gives me the privilege of being very forthright with them. And so one young man was texting me one night, and I didn't understand half of what he was saying. All kinds of abbreviations and I guess jargon maybe. And so instead of trying to wade through that, I sent him back a text. I can text. I said, okay. I sent him back a text saying, I'm 76 years old. When you're speaking with people of my age, you should understand that we do not communicate in the same way. And I want you to learn to communicate with older people as well as you communicate with your peers and so on. And so I took him on as a project to try to help him learn how to talk and learn how to speak to people properly. And then another young man, he came to see me. I was waiting to see me during my open office hours, and I went out, and he was sitting very nicely, because the students are so wonderful. I mean, they're very polite, but not perfect. So I went out and I said, hello, how are you? And I reached out my hand to him, and he reached out his hand to me. And he was wearing a hat, and he remained seated. And so I said, what on earth are you doing? You've been approached by an older woman who is greeting you, and you're still sitting in that chair and wearing your hat. Get up right now and take off your hat. So anyway, I think they laugh at me behind my back, but that's okay, because what if they never heard that from anybody? And so it's not just what you do in the classroom. It's the whole of who you are as a person and what we want you to value in working with other people and understanding what it takes to have good relations with different people and so forth. But beyond that, what do I see as my purpose? To have the best possible university, which means outstanding faculty and staff, exceptional programs, opportunities outside of the classroom for students, but more than that, to represent something as a university that helps our country. And right now, our country needs leadership. And so what I think a lot about in terms of our campus is trying to be a place that does the things that our country needs. Holding conversations across difference, for example. Being a place where it is safe to explore controversial issues. Being a place that emphasizes the unity of purpose that we can share as a people. Being a place that puts forth how important it is for us to be involved in the community and to do service and so forth. So we think also about all of those aspects of leadership, at least I do.
Thank you for that insightful response, Dr. Simmons.
Yeah, so we just kind of want to talk about your story and some of what life experiences have you had that have kind of led you to where you are now in education. And this may be a story about your mom. This may be about your time as a student or a professor. It may even be a world event that's happened that that has shaped that.
Well, first of all, I came to education from the margins of society. And I just love that, And I love it in part because I love education and I love to promote education because of my experience, I know what it means. And so many people who just routinely make their way into school and they have a good experience and all just very wonderful, okay? And they never experience the lack of education. But as you know, during slavery, slaves were prevented from learning. And so learning, preventing people from learning is a form of suppression and control. And so the freedom that education gives you is something that is just so amazing to me. And here's the way I experienced it. When I was young, it was very bizarre. But as blacks, we walked down the streets, and people would just gratuitously pass by and call us nigger, and maybe throw things at us because we were black. There was no reason other than that. Okay, and had they known us, they might have had good reason to do that because maybe we weren't very nice people. I don't know, but they didn't know us, and so when I was growing up, I didn't have a sense in my early days that I was worth anything. And because I was also poor, I didn't have the means to discover anything different from what people were giving me and letting me have access to. And so, but I do remember the very moment that I stepped into a classroom, and from the way that the teacher treated me and looked at me and demanded things of me, I knew that I was something important. Just from that. And that is an incredibly powerful thing to a child, to know that. And so in response to that, I thought, well, gee, maybe I am something, important. But it took a long time for me to work my way out of this feeling that I was less than, always less than. And so really even up into my graduate school days at Harvard, being the only black student in my program, I could feel the oddity of that. I could feel people thinking, what is she doing here? right? And often people would voice this because you see, I was studying a very esoteric topic. I was studying French. And everybody wanted to know what on earth was I doing in French? Because I'm black, and apparently if you're black, you're not supposed to have the freedom to study stuff like French, you know? And so I knew that there was disapproval of me, even though I gained confidence in my ability to apply myself. But I also knew that people thought that I was odd. I think that probably had the most profound effect on me. The fact that I knew I was odd, and that people didn't have confidence that I was doing what I should be doing. My peers said things like, What? French? Are you crazy? You should study something useful. You should be going to law school or studying sociology, and not throwing away your time, you know? And my family didn't know what to make of me because they thought they had given up on me completely and thought that I would never be anything. In fact, a number of people told me that. And they said that, I would never get a job. I'd never be employable, they thought. But here's what people don't understand about the passion we bear for what we do. Is that what makes us achieve? Just as my mother, it was puzzling to me that she would take up that time ironing shirts and try to get them perfect. It made no sense to me, right? And I'm sure people started to see me in the same way. Why would I waste my time with French after all? Because it wouldn't take me anywhere. And so I think I got a lot of apologies later in my career when I became president of, I don't know, Smith or Brown. I heard from my professors who said, well, gee, they just didn't know what to say about that because they couldn't have predicted it. Well, of course you can't predict it because you're not in my body, you're not in my soul, you don't know what I care about, you don't know what I have passion for. Human beings are wonderful and perplexing organisms. Because what's in here that you treasure and that you build for yourself, that can be immutable and really unreadable for other people. But you know it. And so I knew it all along as I progressed that it was perfectly okay for me to do what I was doing. And I just kept doing it in spite of what people said. And it made sense to me that as an African American who came through segregation and who was desperate to understand what the world was about outside of my segregated sphere, it made sense to me to go to Mexico when I was 17 years old and live with a Mexican family, which I did. My family thought I was nuts because I got on a Greyhound bus and went to Mexico to do that. And so I was hungry to know what the world was like outside of my narrow sphere. And that's what was prompting me to study Spanish, to study French, and the other languages that I studied. But people couldn't understand that because they hadn't shared that experience. So I would say those were the pivotal experiences for me. And I think what is most of all what helps me to understand what my students are trying to do.
Well, as a future teacher, I take what you just said as making every student feel important and valued. I take that to heart because that's one of my main goals. So.
You'll be good at that, I'm sure. I'm sure.
So switching topics momentarily, I'd like to talk about your time as the president of an HBCU. So, as a president of an HBCU, a historically Black college or university to be particular, you're aware of the systematic forms of oppression that have previously kept students, specifically Black students, from attending forms of higher education. While this was the previous purpose of HBCUs, how do you see that purpose molding over time, especially as we go into a new age? How do you see the purpose of HBCUs being molded into the future?
That's a very good question. Honestly, I have to tell you that at my age, I would not have predicted where we are today in the country. I could not possibly have predicted it. So when I woke up after George Floyd, I had to come to terms with a very difficult truth for me. And that is, I like to encourage my students that things are so different and that we have, very wide latitude in what we can do today. But I've had to confess that I've been wrong about that. There's so much that I didn't understand that was still unfolding, that my students are experiencing today a form of what I was experiencing, oh my God, 70 years ago. 70 years ago. That breaks my heart, and it makes me think about what we need to do. So here's what I've always thought because of, again, my experience. Each of us is entitled to be in environments that support our development in the best possible way. Some women go to women's colleges. My son went to a men's college. Some students want to go to African American institutions. Some students want to go to other kinds of institutions. And the one thing I tried to convey in my talk was I support them all. Because I can't predict what will be the best thing for you. But you will know. And as long as there are students who need HBCUs, we should be there for them. Because what we care about is not that it's an HBCU or that it's another kind of institution. We care about the fact that they are developing their capacities and they're going to be productive people. That's the most important thing to me. So I think what we find is there's tremendous support for HBCUs right now, probably because the difficulties we're experiencing in the country. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon.
Thank you for that enlightened response.
So I wonder what your experiences have been like going from being a student to being a professor to being a leader of a university, and what changes have been made within you, and just what different kinds of perspectives that you've picked up along that journey.
Well, I was pretty awful. My brothers and sisters tell me every day how awful I was as a child. In fact, 60 Minutes did a piece on me, and Morley Safer came down to Houston, oh my God, to meet with my sisters and brothers. And he asks them that dreaded question, what was she like? And what they said was embarrassing and awful, okay?
Well, you're the youngest, right?
Yes.
That explains it. I'm the oldest, and I know how those younger siblings are.
Well, thank you for your support.
And this is my first time hearing this because I'm an only child. So we have a
whole nother
story.
story.
Well, so, it was hard to get attention when you were the youngest of 12. And so I had to develop my own sense of being, frankly. But I was very opinionated, I would say, as a young person, and that really continued all the way up to the beginning of my profession. And honestly, I think people disliked me so much. I tell the story of how when I first went to Princeton, when people would see me coming, they would cross over to the other side of the street so that they wouldn't have to speak to me. And that's because I was always haranguing them. This is not proper. That isn't proper. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? I was pretty awful because I came up thinking that something needed to be done. And I was always out there saying, this is wrong. That's wrong. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? And I would do it to everybody. Rank had no influence on me at all. And I remember when the new president of Princeton was elected, Harold Shapiro, whom I just adore. Um, and somebody said, well, would you please meet with him to tell him about Black life on the Princeton campus? And why did they say that to me? And I said, I am not your Black person to interpret for you everything that Black people are doing. I just completely, and I refused to meet with the new president of Princeton to play that role. So I was very outspoken and unnecessarily offensive um, in many situations. So the one thing that I learned over time was how to moderate that, because I discovered that it's very hard to get anything done when you're an incessant critic, right? And so I learned to really appreciate things that were working. I learned to appreciate people who were trying to help me get things done. I learned to appreciate the fact that I didn't have the best ideas in every situation. I learned to appreciate the fact that there were people who mattered, irrespective of the fact that they were on the wrong side of things. And I learned to work with them. So that was the greatest gift to me, in a way. And I didn't actually know that I had made that evolution until Smith came to me and asked me to be president of Smith. And when they did that, I said, you must be mistaken. You must not know who I am. And so I was still in that mode, thinking that people just really thought I was awful and that I would just not ever be someone who could be a leader and so forth. And so it surprised me that somehow that transition occurred, and it occurred before I could recognize it myself. So that enabled me to have a successful term in some pretty difficult situations. First at Smith, and then, of course, at Brown. And the second part of it is, I don't know how you feel about this, but that fishbowl is something else. And I don't think I understood when I went to Brown what it would be like to be the first president of an Ivy League university. And being in that fishbowl and watched constantly for missteps and so on, that probably taught me a lot about how to manage in that kind of public sphere, because I think I was not prepared for it. The first thing that happened to me when I got to Brown, let me know if I'm talking too much, but
Keep talking.
Keep talking.
when I first got to Brown, really even before I got there, there was a big incident of national import that occurred. There was a man who was a provocateur who published an ad in the newspaper saying that blacks were very fortunate to have been enslaved because the transatlantic slave trade removed them from Africa, and look where they would be if they had remained in Africa. Well, as you might imagine, that was something else, making that. So the students revolted, and it became a big issue. But one of the groups on campus, I think it was the Young Republicans, invited him to come to campus to speak. And then that created another uproar, because now you've got people who are deeply offended by what he said, and then you've got the people who are advocates of free speech, and so on. So it was a big mess. And so I was supposed to be traveling the day that he came to campus, and so I canceled my travel in order to attend the lecture. The students demanded that I call a halt to it and that I not permit him to speak. And so I said to them, well, I'm going to his lecture because I know in a university we always have a process where people are heard, and then we get a chance to offer different viewpoints. And so I will go to insist that that be the environment. And furthermore, if I can sit there and listen to what he says, you can listen to it too. And so that was it. So it was very to negotiate those different points of view, and to try to show a campus how to behave in these contentious moments. I didn't know that I would have to call on my experience as, walking through the streets of Grapeland, Texas. But I did when I was president of Brown. So you use everything that you learn. You mine every experience that taught you something about life, that taught you something about people, that taught you how to react in difficult circumstances. And so that's why I say I'm grateful for all of the experiences that I've had, because I know I couldn't have done those presidencies without them, frankly, because I wouldn't have had the depth of knowledge necessary to handle those environments.
I think that's an important lesson that everybody should learn, and I appreciate you sharing that.
So, Dr. Simmons, as an educator, what do you see as the most important, or rather, should I say, the most pressing issues facing higher education in Texas? And what can we do about those issues today?
Access is still a big issue. Cost of education. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who throw this notion around that for certain people, college should just be free, right? Unfortunately, the model that we have for our government makes it very hard to do that. But people have proposed the idea that community college should be absolutely free. And so I do believe that the biggest issue for us is still equity and the opportunity for people to have access to education is all important. And it's not just true for college. I mean, imagine the children who start off in elementary school, and if you could track the quality of education they get, you would see that they have virtually little chance of being successful because of the quality of education that they don't have access to. So I think K through 12 is one of the most important things that we have to worry about as universities. And I think universities are partly responsible for the kind of problems that we're seeing in K through 12. Not many people hold this view, but here's what we've done in higher education. We've made higher education elite. That means that professors in higher education get plaudits, they get compensation, they get all kinds of things. But what does the teacher get who's teaching second grade? Very low pay, very difficult conditions. And so in higher education, we should not draw a divide between higher education and K through 12. And I've long said that what we ought to do is promote more the idea that we're all in the same profession. We do different things, but we're the same profession, and we ought to be the strongest advocates for the conditions for teachers, so that we can keep teachers. Right now, teachers are being lost to K through 12 at an alarming rate, and we have to turn that around if we're going to be able to have students make their way to college with all of the capacity that they need in order to do well in college.
Thank you for that response.
So you are a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, the sorority incorporated, and as is my friend Taylor.
Yes.
And
Yes, thank you.
one of our favorite professors is one as well, and she's here to support us, which we very much admire and appreciate her. But one of your goals is to support historically Black colleges and universities. And so how has your role in that sisterhood impacted your presidency of a HBCU?
Well, first of all, these sororities have keep in mind when Alpha Kappa Alpha was formed, the desperate situation that Blacks found themselves in this country. And here's this group of women who come together to do something about it. Okay, just imagine that. And so by doing that and creating this collective of people to do something to help, they have, along with other sororities and fraternities, played a major role in transforming the lives of African Americans in this country. Okay, and so so first of all, they offer a model for engagement in the community. They also support education, especially, but in real terms, not oh, let's say nice things about education. They give scholarships. They are active in the best possible way. So this is what is very important for people to understand. In our lives, there are all kinds of formal mechanisms for making a difference. We have the political sphere. So this afternoon in the car coming down, I made a contribution to a political individual. Okay, we have that capacity to be involved politically. We have the capacity to be involved with our faith community, and we can do all kinds of things in that direction. We have the capacity to get into community centers and help. We have and so forth. So what I've learned, both from AK and from other things, is that I want to do this in lots of different ways. So I'm involved with schools, and I'm involved with museums. I'm on the Museum of the Houston Fine Arts Museum. I'm on the board of the museum in Washington. I love to be involved through the arts. I love to be involved through international organizations. And that's the thing, is you can do all of that and still, function pretty well as a centered human being when you're bringing all of that into your life, and your life is just a lot richer as a consequence. So AKA is a wonderful example of that, and the women who are in AKA are doing that kind of thing all the time.
And you can see that on our campus all the time.
All the time.
Exactly. And thank you so much for speaking on behalf of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Now, my next question is a little bit different, a little more personal, so I kind of want you to embody what I'm about to say. So, given...
Okay.
No, I promise it's not.
Okay.
So, it's okay. It's all right. Given what you know now as an educator, as someone who has led many colleges to great successes, what would you tell your younger self that hasn't had any form of sort of expertise in education? And what I mean by that question is, for someone like Gracie who's about to enter the field of education, or for the many people at Southwestern who are about to enter that field, what would you tell them given what you know now?
That by entering that profession, they will have a profound and extensive effect on legions of people. Quite simply. My teachers don't all know the impact they had on me. And one thing about teachers is sometimes you hear back, right, from students, but most often you never really know. But there are thousands of people out there that you help. And but for your help, they might have had an entirely different path. And so the power in the position is just, it's almost frightening, to be perfectly honest with you, because the number of students that you deal with. I remember when I was approached to become president of Brown, I was very happy at Smith. And so I said, initially I said, no, I'm perfectly happy at Smith. And then someone who was a university president came to meet with me about that, to try to persuade me to go to Brown. And the argument that he made was the number of students at Brown and multiplying that number over the period that I would be president and the influence I would have on those students over that period of time is what ultimately persuaded me to take it on. And it was absolutely the right thing to do because everywhere I go, there's a Brown student who was there during my term, and some who weren't there during my term, who tell me stories of what it meant to them for me to be their president. I remember I used to go in the, I'd go to the campus center and stand to the side and, to say hello to students. And as soon as I get in the campus center, there would be a line formed of students asking me for a hug. Just a hug, okay? So that human connection is inordinately important to human beings. And we always remember those people who made that connection for us. I was going to tell the story of one particular teacher. I don't think I can do it actually without crying, so I think I'm going to have to pass it up. But there's one teacher in particular who was responsible for me going to college. I knew I couldn't go to college. There was no way to do it. I mean, I simply couldn't afford it, and so that was off my list. This teacher said I could go to college. And she went beyond that. She contacted the place where she had been to college. She talked them into giving me a scholarship. And then, knowing that I didn't have any means whatsoever, she got a group of teachers together, went to their houses, went in their closets, took their clothes, and packed a bag for me to go to college. And then when I was in college, she sent me money. So the thing is that there are so many ways in which that kind of contact and that kind of mentorship and that kind of assistance can extend so far beyond you. So I think of her, and I think of all of the students that I've influenced since then, and that all comes directly from her and what she did for me. So it is a powerful position to be a teacher, and I wish every teacher understood how powerful it is. And I always remind teachers, I say when you become a teacher, your first obligation is to learn to be an actress or an actor. Because there's not a single day that you can afford to walk into a classroom and let your students know you're having a bad day. Not once can you do that. Because that very day could be the most important day in that child's life, and it might be the thing that really prompts them to do something extraordinary. I had a teacher when I spent a year at Wellesley, and I had a teacher of French. And I must say I was lost at Wellesley. Every student in the class had been to France, of course, and they were pretty fluent in French. And when I got there and I went to class, and I didn't understand anything in the class that was going on. And so I got discouraged, and I decided I had to drop out of French. And so I went to the professor and I said, I'm very sorry, but I have to drop your class because I'm lost. I don't understand anything that's going on in class, and I'm missing all of the assignments. And he refused to sign my card so that I could drop the class. And I thought, well, this is the worst sort of human being ever. Very, unempathetic and so forth. And I was enraged. So I said, well, what shall I do? And he said, just work harder. And so that's what I did. I went back. I went to the language lab more. I worked harder. And today I have a PhD in French. Okay, so you affect students in different ways. Sometimes by chiding them, pushing them when they need to be pushed, whatever it is. But it is such a privilege to be a teacher, and to be able to influence students in that way.
I want to, let's see, I may not
Turn
have
it
this
on.
You're on.
You're on.
Okay.
You're on.
I want to thank our students, Gracie and Taylor, for your great questions.
Great.
And I'd also like to thank you for spending your time with us, for talking about things that not only will change our students' lives, but so many of their students' lives. And I appreciate you coming here. I am so glad that you took this opportunity and to spend this amount of time. And I just want to say thank you, everybody.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you.
You all are just great.